Thank you so much for being here today with us. I'm pleased to be here with the Legislative Women's Caucus and my colleagues in the Legislative Women's Caucus to discuss several important steps that we're pursuing on behalf of California women and their families. We've selected 4 pillars that form the base of the caucus priorities and the women's economic agenda. There is a document in the press packet that has a complete list of all the policy and budget proposals the Women's Caucus has identified as part of these pillars. At this news conference, we will be highlighting 4 policy priorities from each of those pillars and then take questions at the end. The 4 pillars of the Women's Economic Agenda and the caucus's policy priorities are fair pay and job opportunity, access to child care, family-friendly workplaces, building economic stability by addressing poverty. Women continue to increase our role and our impact on our economy. It's vital we pursue policies that help ensure opportunity and equality. These actions will help more California women not only participate in the economic recovery, but also in building our economic future. Last year, the caucus had 9 priority bills. 8 were sent to the governor, and all 8 of those bills were signed. I want to turn it over and introduce to you the chair of the Women's Caucus, Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, with the first pillar, fair pay and job opportunity. Senator, here.
Well, as the chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus, I would just like to reiterate that this is really an extraordinary day. It is the first time the Legislative Women's Caucus is presenting this visionary and comprehensive legislative package to create a stronger California by securing economic opportunity for all women. And as someone who has been fighting this battle for so many years, to see this room full of people and people who have come together, women's groups representing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Californians, to put forward this agenda, which we believe is going to make this state stronger, give women greater opportunity, and make sure that we have a sustainable economic future for all Californians. This is an extraordinary moment. And so I want to thank the Stronger California Advocates Network. These are, as I mentioned, advocate groups representing so many people here in the state who have worked for so many years to help give us the critical information that we need and have put together in these major pillars. This is an historic collaboration because, like us, these people know that these pillars are necessary if we are serious about economic security and economic prosperity for all Californians. Now, at the end of our session, the advocates will be here at the conclusion to answer any specific questions that you might have. Women are absolutely critical to a strong and vibrant economy. And we are at an important juncture for California and California women, a place where we can both make a difference and recognize that a difference needs to be made. We are catching our breath after an economic downturn that took place over several years, resulting in draconian cuts in our budget to assist women and to make sure that equality of opportunity existed. Momentum has been building in this state without question and nationwide for change that recognizes a woman's right to equal pay and to an economic future that is fair, secure, and stable from a time a woman enters the workplace to her retirement and senior years. Yet women continue to lag behind. We are still paid less than our male counterparts. We continue to struggle for access to childcare and workplaces with family-friendly policies, and we are more likely to be affected by poverty. This isn't just about pocketbooks for California's families, though, although that is important. This is also about building a strong future for the entire state. And with that in mind, the first pillar that our speaker mentioned is fair pay and job opportunities, because these are critically important to a woman's economic future. The measures within this pillar help to ensure that women are paid fairly for their work, have a living wage, and access to job training opportunities that can lift them and their families from poverty. 2/3 of the lowest paid workers in the state of California are women. This needs to change. In California, a woman earns on average 84% of what a man earns. That has a domino effect during her lifetime earnings, with her highest wage and ultimately her retirement security in the offing. With the Latino wage gap being 44 cents on the dollar to a white male, this is the worst in the nation, and it has been at a low level for decades. Women are losing $33 billion in income per year because of unequal pay. And California will be stronger when women are able to put their earnings back into the economy, feeding their families, clothing them, providing housing, providing goods and services, which then replenish and continue to advance economic growth. Through legislation in this package, we are trying to make things right and make California stronger. That is why I, together with members of the Women's Caucus, introduced SB 358, pay equity legislation, which the caucus announced at a previous press conference at the end of January. This bill makes it harder for companies to pay women less for comparable work and makes it easier for women to figure out that they are being paid less. The time to act is now. And I personally, and I look out here in the room with some of the other gray-haired folks, we've been fighting this battle for 35 or 40 years. And it's time that we turn this around. So at the moment, I have one of our younger members who doesn't have gray hair yet, but she has been... Well, we won't go into that. But certainly one of our younger members who has been fighting this battle for a number of years herself, the vice chair of the Women's Caucus, Assembly Member Cristina Garcia, who will be presenting on the issue the caucus has been fighting for years, will continue to do so, access to childcare. Assembly Member Garcia.
And I want to correct, I didn't have gray hair until I got to the State Assembly. We have it now. I'm excited to be here on behalf of all the families and the 19 million women in the state. Access to quality child care affects a mother's and really the whole family's economic future. When a mother doesn't have access to quality child care, she's often forced to piece together child care with neighbors or family members. This model often doesn't meet a child's developmental or safety needs, and it's not always very reliable. The reality is that childcare is expensive for most low and middle income families, even for young professionals who are at the start of their careers. Childcare costs about $12,000 for an infant and somewhere between $7,000 to $10,000 for a toddler. This is challenging to most families. For a single mother making the median income in the state of California, this is 44% of your income. SB 544, De Leon Atkins, intends to narrow the gap between childcare need and those that have it by creating new slots and supporting additional training for childcare providers. This bill will also establish the right of childcare workers to collectively bargain. The other side of the coin is if a woman steps out of the job market for a few years because she can't find quality, affordable early childhood education for her child. Those years of lost wages and work experience will also have a domino effect on her economic future, reducing her lifetime earnings, her highest salary, and her retirement security. That's why the Women's Caucus is requesting $600 million to expand access to affordable quality childhood education. On behalf of the Women's Caucus, Senator Jackson and I have sent letters to leadership and budget committee chairs requesting a renewed commitment to childcare for all families. For the Women's Caucus, childcare is a huge issue, as it has such a huge impact on women and families. If our budget is a value-based document, we have to then ask, what are the effects if we are not giving the childcare to these families and these women? We need to make sure that it receives more attention, and the time is now. We're here to say we care about California's women and children and recognize that quality childcare impacts all families in California. And now, Assemblywoman Shirley Brown will speak on the next pillar. No, Shirley Weber. I can't read my own notes. Shirley Weber. I can't read my own notes. It's the gray hair or the youngness.
That's okay. That's a good thing. Good morning, and I appreciate the fact that my colleagues have taken this challenge to advocate on behalf of women in a strong way, not just in a silent way, which sometimes we do when we suffer in silence and in our own silos, but have come together as a caucus to really raise the issues that are critical to California, that is going to help California be a stronger California, not only for us in this room, but for generations to come. It is absolutely necessary that we work to secure the economic opportunity for women in providing stable and family-friendly workplaces for those who are at the lowest income level that we know. We know that 1 in 5 children basically live in this state in poverty. And if you've ever lived in poverty, you know the devastating effect it can have on every aspect of your life without some serious intervention. Having been raised in the projects of Los Angeles, I know just how difficult it is to imagine beyond the world in which you live when you live in poverty. And there's a lot of great things that can happen for you if you have the right kind of intervention, whether it's in our schools, in our communities, our churches, when it makes a difference, when it really bridges the gap of where you are and where you need to go. Single parents, usually women, are more likely to live in low-income families and have low income for their children. What is worse is that those jobs are often what we call involuntary part-time jobs. And that has become a term that we're using today because we're finding more and more of our women and our citizens working part-time jobs. Not just one job, but sometimes 2 and 3 jobs to make a difference in their life. I was meeting the other day with one of my judges in the community who deals with juvenile justice. And her greatest challenge was that we have a lot of women now working 2 and 3 part-time jobs, which makes it very difficult to help their children, to get their children to school on time, to provide any kind of transportation for them to do. And so we can imagine just how difficult it is when you have these challenges. Those of us who have one job know the challenge of planning childcare and emergencies and things that occur when we have adequate resources and we have one job. You can only imagine what it's like when you have 2 and 3 jobs, that you have to manage that. Now imagine, in addition to that, not knowing exactly when you're going to work on those jobs. You know, when you're looking at a situation and you have the vulnerability of having the employer decide when you're going to work almost at a spur of the moment, that you have to be called in, or you have your hours canceled very quickly when you had planned to work, and now all of that affects your life. You know, I can remember a young man once who was getting his life together who had a part-time job, a friend of mine. And he was called to work, and he went to work, and the employer said, I've got an emergency. We've got to get all of this stuff out. It was a packing company. And he and these guys worked really hard to get it out because it had to be mailed by noon. And at the end of working and doing 8 hours of work, really in 4 hours, to help this employer, he said, now I have no more work for you today. With no thought at all about the impact that that had on these young men's lives and young women's lives in terms of what they're going to do for their income. These are the kinds of things that thousands and thousands of Californians are faced with every day as we see the population growing more in these involuntary part-time jobs. So as a result of that, I have authored the bill, AB 357, with my colleague from San Francisco, David Chu, that would jointly art with the Fair and Predictable Scheduling Act. And I want to commend those who have had the foresight in the Bay Area to make this a part of their life in San Francisco. And we have taken this on as a critical issue for women in California. This bill, AB 357, would simply require food and retail establishments with over 500 or more employees in California to provide at least a 2-week scheduling notice for their workers and additional pay for last-minute schedule changes. This simple fix would bring considerable stability to the lives of women and men who need to work other jobs, arrange transportation, and make sure their children are watched and safe and fed. It would also allow unpaid time off without penalty for school dealings with legitimate issues outside of the workplace, including things like doctor's appointments and meetings with teachers and other jobs that they have to go to. It provides a predictable scheduling it is a simple and fair and common business sense, especially reducing the expense to employers overall. It's really interesting that normally I don't celebrate certain large, big retailers, but it's interesting that Walmart has found out that it is extremely important to retain good employees, to have somewhat of a predictable scheduling, so that now their policy is they have to give 2-week schedules and notice for employees to talk about stability and basically in predictability in the lives of their employees. We want to make that a standard and not something unusual in California in order to secure the future of our children and our families and to strengthen this state. I'm excited about AB 357 and the caucus is as well, and we hope to move this forward and obviously have the governor sign it. Thank you so very much. Who's the next speaker? Are you next? Okay. Our next speaker will be Ms. Holly Mitchell.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about the fourth pillar, which is poverty alleviation. I'll be sharing that with my colleague, Assemblywoman Cheryl Brown, because we're going to talk about the impact of poverty, quite frankly, from cradle to grave, if you will. And poverty alleviation is the fourth pillar that I stand proudly with my colleagues from the Women's Caucus and our supporters. Because as Fannie Lou Hamer said many, many years ago, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when you hear the statistics that my colleagues have shared today in terms of earned income, challenges with childcare, I'm sure all of you in the room feel the same as we do. Lifting women and children out of poverty and eradicating racial discrimination are the best ways to help marginalized children realize their full potential and to help our society make opportunity real. The true question before us today is not whether we will make a difference, but what each of us individually and collectively will do to make the difference for California's children. It's for this reason that I am once again carrying SB 23 to repeal the harmful and discriminatory maximum family grant rule in the CalWORks system. The MFG was passed as a part of a budget play in the 1990s as a misguided attempt to reduce the number of children born out of wedlock. It's been 15 years since the rule was implemented, and we still have no evidence that it worked towards the goal of lowering birth rates. Yet over the same time, we've seen California's families slip deeper into poverty, and California earning the distinction of becoming the nation's leader in child poverty. CalWORks grants puts families below 40% of the federal poverty level. Under the MFG rule, a family forced to spread its meager resources further slips deeper into poverty, in some instances as low as 26% of the federal poverty level. Under the maximum family grant rule, we undermine the CalWORks program and the families it's attempting to serve by unnecessarily keeping families from receiving the very benefits they need and the very benefits CalWORks was designed to develop, to give in order to navigate away from poverty traps and become self-sufficient. Data shows that children raised in deep poverty are apt to suffer lifelong educational and socioeconomic deficits, being caught in a cycle of multi-generational poverty that is devastating to them personally and costly to all of us as California taxpayers. This year, this budget, this legislative cycle, children cannot remain an afterthought as we rebuild California's future and California's economy. If we do not develop a strategy to eliminate deep poverty for children in California, or at least cut it in half over the next 5 years, the future is stark for the 1 million California children who live in poverty and the 500,000 who live in deep poverty. Deep poverty, if you haven't heard, is a family of 3 attempting to live in California on less than $15,000 a year. And there are 500,000 children who live in your neighborhoods and mine, who go to school with your children in mind, who are going to be the future employees and employers of California, who will not have the core fundamental early life experiences that we need for them to have in order to grow up and lead California into the innovative future that we need for it to do. 2-year-olds, as I've said repeatedly, don't get a do-over. and the costs of us doing nothing are far too great to bear. Again, SB 23 reflects the fourth policy pillar for the Women's Caucus, which is the elimination of poverty, which is why it's my top priority as Budget Subcommittee Chair for Health and Human Services in the Senate, and I deeply appreciate the Legislative Women's Caucus, my colleagues in the California Legislative Black Caucus, by making this bill and poverty a top priority for us this budget and legislative session. Assemblywoman Cheryl Brown will talk about the other end of the spectrum of why we must eliminate poverty in the state of California, senior women.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair, and those others that are here and those that are joining us now. You know, every day, 1,000 people in California are turning 65. That will happen for the next 17 years. We are in for a silver tsunami. Aging is a women's issue. In the 65-plus age bracket, women, men, we outnumber you, 56 to 44. By the age 85, we outnumber men 2 to 1. Poverty is rampant amongst seniors. California has the highest percentage as well as the highest number of impoverished seniors. Roughly 54% struggle to make ends meet on a monthly basis. Women of color are at 3 times greater risk of impoverishment than the general population. State policymakers and the governor reduced the SSI and SSP grants in order to help close the budget shortfalls during the Great Recession. The recession was over 5 years ago. However, those cuts remain in place and cause aged, blind, and disabled Californians to live below the federal poverty line. I'm announcing legislation that will end this blemish on California's otherwise spectacular recovery. And housing alone is one of the devastating problems that we have. Rent for a studio apartment in all 58 counties exceeds 50% of the current grant. And in 15 counties, it exceeds 100% of the grant. My soon-to-be-introduced bill will increase the current grant for a single adult from $889 a month to $1,099 a month, giving them a better chance to make ends meet. And now, Madam Chair.
I'd like to just introduce those other members of the Women's Caucus and friends who have come in late or who haven't had an opportunity to speak. We have Senator Carol Liu, Senator Lonnie Hancock, we have Assemblymember Patty Lopez, we have Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, Senator Connie Leyva, Assemblymember April Autumnberg. April Autumn. It's a good time of year, whatever it is. And Assemblymember Guado Garcia and Assemblymember Chu, who was referenced a little bit earlier for his legislation that he's joint authoring here as well. So we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. You might direct them to the particular author who has spoken or not. We will have our sponsors and others who've done that in-depth research available as well. And so we'll take a few questions if you have them. Yes?
I have a question for Speaker Atkins. So the LAO came out last week with that report that said California's been building hundreds of thousands of houses less, fewer than it should have been. And one of the recommendations was for the legislature to make it easier to build for private home builders to build homes. What's your take on that? Are you going to take any action on that?
Well, I think the point I would like to make, the LAO is absolutely right. We are hundreds of thousands of units behind in the development that we need for housing for the people in California. The package I've laid out talks a lot about the affordable housing piece. And I will just say, many of the affordable housing units that we're talking about already take advantage of those exemptions that is being recommended. Do we need to look at other ways to streamline? A lot of those things are local controlled policies, and local control is important. Do we want to evaluate how to do it quicker and better? Keeping in mind that we need to build smartly, we need to build wisely, we need to make sure that it works with communities. So we have a lot of work to do in that arena. My first step is we've got to replace some of the dollars that we need to put housing on the ground for some of these folks that make less than $15,000 a year. So my first step is to deal with the issue of affordable housing for people who live on these incomes that we're talking about here today.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Any other questions related to the subject matter of today's press conference? Yes.
In terms of practical efforts, what does it mean for these bills to be priority legislation, and what will you be doing to further them?
Well, what the Women's Caucus is planning to do is, you've seen some of our members here, we are all going to not only be supporting these bills, but advocating for these bills as part of a package. We represent a very significant number of the membership of both houses, and we are committed to making sure that these measures will pass and will be signed into law. So this is a collaborative, coordinated effort amongst the members of this caucus whose presence and numbers will result, we anticipate, in some very powerful statements and very successful actions as a result. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Yes, last question.
Do you have any sense that it's going to be, is there any opportunity for bipartisan backing for any of these measures?
We are hoping, we have been talking with our Republican colleagues. We have been hoping that they will participate. We still hope that they will. At this point in time, the support for these measures has come from the Democratic members of the caucus, but we continue to work with our Republican colleagues and hope that we will be able to make this a bipartisan effort. Well, thank you all for being here, and many of us will remain and answer any questions you might have. Thanks so much for being here.